All right, diving in today, folks, we're going deep, deep into the world of Tennessee Williams.
Oh, yeah.
One of the greats, no doubt about it.
Absolutely. Up there with the likes of Eugene O'Neill, Arthur Miller.
Right, titans of American drama. But who is the man behind those powerful plays, those unforgettable characters?
Well, that's what we're here to uncover.
We've got a whole treasure trove of biographical material ready to unpack to really understand Tennessee Williams, his journey.
From his Southern roots to his rise as a playwright, his personal struggle.
And, of course, his enduring legacy on the stage and beyond. So let's get started, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're starting in Columbus, Mississippi.
Yep. That's where Thomas Lanier Williams III, that was his given name, was born.
Born on March 26, 1911.
That's right. Now, his family background is interesting. English, Welsh, and Huguenot ancestry.
A real mix there. But what jumps out at you from those early family dynamics?
Well, the father, Cornelius, he was a traveling shoe salesman struggling with alcoholism.
Ah, so not around much, I'm guessing.
You got it. Often absent. And his mother, Edwina Dykin, it seems she poured a lot of attention onto young Thomas.
Probably trying to compensate for that unhappy marriage.
That's the picture we're getting, yeah. And then there were the grandparents.
His maternal grandparents, right? They played a pretty big part in his life, too, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Especially the grandfather, Reverend Walter Dykin.
The Episcopal priest.
Right. And Tennessee Williams spent a lot of time at the rectory in Clarksdale, Mississippi.
Interesting. Must have been a stark contrast to the tension he was experiencing at home.
Definitely. And he had siblings, too. An older sister, Rose Isabel.
And a younger brother.
Walter Dykin Williams. But something that really impacted his childhood, almost took his life, was diphtheria.
Oh, wow. That's serious.
It was. Left him weak and frail for a whole year.
Makes you wonder how that affected him, physically and emotionally.
Yeah, especially with his father, who, from what we understand, was a pretty tough, imposing figure.
Yeah, the sources paint him as seeing his son as effeminate and prone to these angry outbursts.
Not exactly an easy environment for a sensitive young artist to thrive in.
Definitely not. Now, most critics and historians seem to agree that this dysfunctional family life became a huge inspiration for his work.
That need to escape, to break free from what he perceived as a really restrictive upbringing.
You can almost see it in the characters he writes, that longing to break free.
Absolutely. And then when he was 8, the family moved to St. Louis because of his dad's work.
But even that didn't bring any real peace to the family, did it?
No, they moved around a lot within St. Louis because of the constant friction between his parents.
So much upheaval.
It was. He went to Soldan High School, which he would later use as the setting for the Glass Menagerie.
Oh, interesting.
And then University City High School. And even back then, his writing was getting noticed, little by little.
Really?
Yeah. At 16, he won 3rd prize for an essay he wrote.
Wow, not bad for a teenager.
And then at 17, his short story, The Vengeance of Nitocris, was published.
Didn't make him famous just yet, though.
Not at that point. But in 1928, he traveled to Europe for the first time with his grandfather.
Must have been quite an experience for a young man, opening up his world.
Oh, absolutely. Seeing new cultures, experiencing different forms of art, really influential.
Okay, so let's talk about his more formal education.
So in 1929, he enrolls at the University of Missouri.
Studying to be a journalist?
That was the initial plan.
But it sounds like he wasn't really cut out for the typical college life.
Yeah, found it kind of boring, and he was dealing with a lot emotionally and unrequited love.
Young love.
But here's where it gets interesting. He starts entering these writing contests to earn some money.
A little entrepreneurial spirit.
That's right, and one of his first plays, Beauty's the Word, gets submitted.
What was that one about?
It was actually about rebelling against a strict religious upbringing. Pretty bold for a freshman.
You can see some of those personal themes starting to emerge.
Totally. And then another play comes out around this time, Hot Milk at 3 in the morning.
Catchy title.
He tries fitting in, joins a fraternity, Alpha Tau Omega, but doesn't really find his place there.
Another instance of not quite fitting in.
Yeah, that outsider feeling. It pops up a lot in his later work, doesn't it?
Definitely. But then things take a turn. His dad pulls him out of university after he fails military training.
Yep, makes him work at the International Shoe Company factory.
Oh, can't imagine that was his dream job.
Hated it, absolutely hated it. Found the work mind-numbingly dull.
But in a way, this difficult experience fueled his writing even more, right?
It did. He was determined to escape that dreary reality, set himself this goal of writing a new short story every week.
Wow, that's a lot.
His mother even talked about how he'd stay up late, fueled by coffee, just writing, writing, writing.
Pure dedication.
It was, but all that pressure, plus the unhappiness of his job, it took its toll. He had a nervous breakdown around his 24th birthday,
Oh, no.
had to leave the factory. And this is where it gets really fascinating, because those experiences, that oppressive environment, even a specific coworker, they're said to have inspired the character of Stanley Kowalski.
No way. From A Streetcar Named Desire.
That's right.
Talk about drawn from real life.
And around the same time, his parents finally separate.
Ah, so all this turmoil is happening at once.
Exactly. Mid-1930s, they split up because of his father's alcoholism and abusive behavior.
Though they didn't officially separate legally until 1946.
And never actually divorced. Interesting, right?
So those family tensions continue to loom large.
Oh, for sure. He tries going back to school, enrolls at Washington University in St. Louis.
In 1936.
Writes a play called Me Vashya, but it doesn't last.
What happened?
Didn't win the university's poetry prize and just drops out.
Seems like a pattern, always searching for that recognition, that success.
And in 1937, he finally lands at the University of Iowa, actually graduates this time.
It's how to feel good.
With a BA in English, August 1938.
So he does have that formal education under his belt.
He does, but he's not done learning, moves on to the dramatic workshop of the New School in New York City.
Immersing himself in the world of theater.
Absolutely, honing his craft. He even talks about this early collaborative play, Cairo, Shanghai, Bombay.
What was so special about that?
He said that during one performance, he heard the audience laughing, and it just hit him, like this powerful connection was made.
He found his calling.
Yeah, said the theater became his lifeline, you know.
Powerful stuff. And then in 1939, he makes a big decision.
Adopts the pen name Tennessee Williams.
Embracing his southern roots, that drawl.
It was a deliberate choice, crafting this artistic persona, you know.
So in the years leading up to his big break, he's soaking up all these literary influences.
Oh yeah, the list is impressive. Hart Crane, Arthur Rimbaud.
Wow, those are some big names.
Anton Chekhov, Shakespeare, even Clarence Darrow, D.H. Lawrence.
That's quite a range.
Yeah.
Poetry, drama, social commentary. He's drawing from everywhere.
Catherine Mansfield, Strindberg, Faulkner, Thomas Wolfe, Emily Dickinson.
Really an eclectic taste.
William Inge, James Joyce, and some believe even Hemingway had an influence.
It's like he's absorbing all these different styles, voices.
Absolutely, feeding that creative hunger. But success didn't come easy.
No, he paid his dues, working odd jobs, even took care of chickens on a ranch for a bit.
Anything to make ends meet. But in 1939, things start to change.
What happens?
He gets this grant from the Rockefeller Foundation for his play Battle of Angels.
That must have been a huge boost.
It was. Sadly, the play itself wasn't a hit when it was produced in Boston in 1940.
But the grant opened some doors, right?
Big time. It allowed him to move to New Orleans that same year.
1939, a city that would become so important to him.
Oh, yeah. He found work writing for the Works Progress Administration there.
And he lived in the French Quarter, right on Toulouse Street.
722 Toulouse Street, to be exact. That place would become the setting for his play Vieux Carré later on.
Amazing how he drew inspiration from the places he lived.
Absolutely. New Orleans became this vibrant backdrop for his stories, all that atmosphere, that faded grandeur.
And the grant also led to something else pretty exciting, didn't it?
You bet it did.
Yeah.
He lands a 6-month writing contract with MGM.
Hollywood calling?
Maybe not the most creatively fulfilling experience at the time, but it gave him some financial security.
And a glimpse into the world of filmmaking.
Exactly. And then comes 1944, the year everything changed.
The Glass Menagerie.
Bingo! It premiered in Chicago, got some really good reviews, and then it moved to Broadway.
It became an instant hit.
A smash hit. He wins the New York Drama Critics Circle Award for Best Play of the Season.
His breakthrough moment.
No doubt about it. And Elia Kazan, who would go on to direct many of his most famous plays, said something really insightful about him.
What was that?
He said, everything in his life is in his plays, and everything in his plays is in his life.
That's spot on, isn't it? His work is so personal, so drawn from his own experiences.
Absolutely. And then, just a few years later, in 1947, he really cements his place in theater history.
With A Streetcar Named Desire.
One of the greatest American plays of the 20th century, no question.
The raw emotion, the complex characters, those themes of desire, loneliness, it's just so powerful.
It's a masterpiece. And it's during this period, the late 40s and 50s, that he starts traveling more extensively with his partner, Frank Merlot.
Finding some stability, maybe even happiness.
It seems so. They spend summers in Europe, moving between New York, New Orleans, Key West.
Rome, Barcelona, London, always on the move.
He said he needed these radical changes in environment to lift his spirits, you know?
Interesting. And his career just explodes during this time.
Between 1948 and 1959, he has 7 plays produced on Broadway.
7. That's incredible.
Summer and Smoke, The Rose Tattoo, Camino Real, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
Orpheus Descending, Garden District, Sweet Bird of Youth.
The man was a writing machine, churning out these critically acclaimed, commercially successful plays.
And by 1959, he had racked up a pretty impressive collection of awards, hadn't he?
Oh, yeah. 2 Pulitzer Prizes, 3 New York Drama Critics Circle Awards.
3 Donaldson Awards, and a Tony.
He was at the top of his game, no doubt. And then there were the film adaptations of his plays,
Bringing his stories to an even wider audience.
starting in the early 50s with The Glass Menagerie, A Streetcar Named Desire.
Then Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, The Rose Tattoo, Orpheus Descending.
The Night of the Iguana, Sweet Bird of Youth, Summer and Smoke.
So many iconic movies born from his words.
Really solidified his place in popular culture. But then the 60s and 70s hit, and things take a turn for the worse.
Yeah, this period seems much darker.
A lot of personal turmoil, theatrical failures, even though he kept writing every day.
The source suggests that his struggles with alcohol and drugs really started to affect the quality of his work.
Yeah, and some of the collaborations he got involved in weren't so successful either.
It's like the pressure, the expectations, it all became too much.
And then in 1963, a huge loss, his partner Frank Merlot dies.
That must have been devastating.
It sent him into a deep depression. He's in and out of treatment facilities.
And his muddy and brother become more involved in his life at this point, right?
Yeah, trying to manage things, but not always in a way that was helpful.
It's a tough situation.
It was. And the plays he writes during this time, they just don't connect with audiences like before.
Like Kingdom of Earth, in the bar of a Tokyo hotel, small craft warnings.
Box office flops. And the bad press really gets to him.
Imagine going from such success to such disappointment.
Must have been heartbreaking. Even his final play, A House Not Meant to Stand, premiered in 1982.
In Chicago, and got some decent reviews.
It did, but didn't have a long run.
Still, it's important to note that he did receive some recognition later in life.
For sure. He wins the St. Louis Literary Award in 1974.
And gets inducted into the American Theater Hall of Fame in 1979.
A few years before his death.
All right, let's shift gears a bit. Talk about his personal life, which we know is so intertwined with his work.
Okay, yeah, his relationship with his sister Rose was particularly significant.
They were very close throughout his life.
Tragically, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia at a young age.
In 1943, she underwent a lobotomy,
A prefrontal lobotomy.
a procedure that had devastating consequences.
Left her institutionalized for the rest of her life.
That must have been incredibly difficult for him.
It was a huge burden. He supported her financially, made sure she was cared for in a private institution.
And visited her often.
The source even suggests that the trauma of her lobotomy might have contributed to his own substance abuse issues.
Like he was carrying some of that pain himself.
It's really heartbreaking. Now, he did have some relationships with women in his early years.
But by the late 30s, he starts exploring his homosexuality.
Finds a community in the gay social circles of New York City.
And there's this early relationship that seems to have had a big impact on him.
With a young dancer named Kip Kiernan in Provincetown back in 1940.
What happened there?
Well, it ends when Kiernan decides to marry a woman.
Heartbreak.
And then, just 4 years later, Kiernan dies at the young age of 26.
Another devastating loss.
Absolutely. You can see how these experiences with love and loss would find their way into his plays.
And he had other relationships too, right?
He did, some more tumultuous than others. There was Pancho Rodriguez y Gonzalez, a hotel clerk he met in Taos.
And a relationship in Rome with a young man he referred to as Raffaello.
He even helped Raphael financially, and that relationship actually inspired his novel, The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone.
Wow, each relationship adding another layer to his understanding of love, connection, heartbreak.
But the one that stands out as his most enduring, most significant romantic partnership was with Frank Merlot.
14 years they were together.
Merlot was an occasional actor himself.
Seems like he brought some much-needed stability to Tennessee Williams's life.
Definitely. A grounding force during his bouts of depression and anxiety. They lived together in Manhattan and Key West.
And Merlot even became his personal secretary.
Williams had this fear of going insane. You know, like his sister.
And those years with Merlot seem to have been his happiest, most creatively productive.
It's really touching that even after the relationship ended, when Merlot got sick with lung cancer,
Tennessee Williams went back to care for him until his death in 1963.
Speaks volumes about the depth of their bond. But after Merlot's death, things really spiral downwards.
His depression worsens. The drug and alcohol use escalates.
Multiple hospitalizations, trying different treatments, even seeing that infamous Dr. Feelgood.
Who was known for giving his patients amphetamines.
Exactly. He even briefly converts to Catholicism, but it doesn't stick.
It's like he's searching for something, anything, to ease the pain, fill that void.
He also had a later relationship in the 70s with a much younger man, Robert Carroll.
A Vietnam veteran and aspiring writer.
Right, and he cared for him deeply, even included him in his will.
But their relationship was complicated, wasn't it?
He described it as having both sweetness and beastliness.
They broke up in 1979, but stayed friends.
Just another example of those complex dynamics in his personal life. And in his later years, he started worrying about aging, losing his appeal, his creativity.
It's sad to think about him facing those fears.
It is. Then, on February 25th, 1983, he dies at the Hotel Elysee in New York City.
At the age of 71.
The initial report said he choked on a cap from a nasal spray bottle.
But that turned out not to be true.
Yeah, the medical examiner later clarified that he died from a toxic level of seconal, a barbiturate.
And he'd likely used the nasal spray cap to swallow the pills.
It's a bit grim.
And he had some specific wishes about how he wanted to be buried, didn't he?
He wanted to be buried at sea, sewn into a canvas sack, and dropped into the Caribbean, near where the poet Hart Crane died.
A poetic ending.
But his brother, Dakin, ended up arranging a more traditional burial for him.
At Calvary Cemetery in St. Louis.
Next to their mother.
It's interesting how, even in death, his wishes weren't fully honored.
Yeah, kind of ironic. And his estate, most of it went to the University of the South.
But with this special stipulation.
It was held in trust for his sister Rose, and after her death in 1996, the university received a substantial amount of money.
To fund a creative writing program.
A fitting tribute to his legacy as a writer.
Absolutely. And the recognition he's received since his death has been incredible.
A centennial celebration in 2011, induction into the Poets' Corner at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine.
Theaters, exhibitions, literary festivals, all named after him.
That Tennessee Williams New Orleans Literary Festival, held every year since 1986, that's a testament to his lasting impact on that city.
And there are theater companies specifically focused on producing his plays.
Even a Tennessee Williams Festival in his hometown of St. Louis every year now.
Plus a U.S. Postal Service stamp, a star on the St. Louis Walk of Fame, a marker on the Mississippi Writers Trail.
His literary legacy is still managed by his longtime agency, making sure his work reaches new generations.
And it's fascinating how his family members appear in his plays, often thinly disguised.
You see it in The Glass Menagerie, Laura representing his sister Rose, Amanda his mother.
Tom and Sebastian often seen as versions of himself at different points in his life.
That blurring of life and art is so central to his work.
Even his sister's lobotomy became a plot point in Suddenly Last Summer.
And of course, those 2 Pulitzer Prizes for A Streetcar Named Desire and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
Though there was some controversy surrounding the award for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, wasn't there?
Yeah, it wasn't the jury's initial pick.
But Joseph Pulitzer Jr. himself really championed the play and made sure it won.
It shows you how subjective these awards can be sometimes.
And how one person's passion can make all the difference.
Absolutely. Even some of his lesser-known plays, like The Parade or Approaching the End of a Summer.
And Something Cloudy, Something Clear.
They drew heavily from his own life, especially his early romance with Kip Kiernan.
He was constantly working through his experiences in his writing.
Processing, reflecting, understanding.
And it seems his final play, In Masks, Outrageous and Austere, was no different.
It's like he was trying to make sense of it all those forces that shaped his life.
Looking back on his journey, seeking some kind of resolution.
Really powerful stuff.
So we've come to the end of our deep dive into the world of Tennessee Williams.
A complex, brilliant, troubled man.
From a difficult childhood in the South to becoming one of the giants of American theater.
His connection to his family, the tragedy of his sister Rose, his own struggles, it all fueled his art.
And despite those later struggles, his plays continue to resonate with audiences today.
Exploring those universal themes of desire, loneliness, the human condition.
They really make you think, make you feel. So as we wrap up, we'd like to leave you with a thought.
A question to ponder.
Tennessee Williams was so deeply connected to his own past. How do you think our personal histories, those moments of joy and pain, shape our own creations?
What streetcar are you riding in your own life, and where is it taking you?
Something to think about.
It really is.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Until next time. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're zeroing in on a real legend in military aviation, the Boeing AH-64 Apache attack helicopter. For you, the learner, we're going to unpack the fascinating story of this iconic aircraft. We'll trace its journey from the drawing board, really, all the way to its current status as a key military asset worldwide. We'll look at its development, the design features, its pretty extensive operational history, and, the different versions it's evolved into.
And our main source today is the incredibly detailed Wikipedia page on the AH-64 Apache. It's really comprehensive. It lets us follow the helicopter's whole evolution. We can look at its progress, get into the technical specifics, and really grasp the role it's played in, well, quite a few conflicts and with various militaries.
Exactly. Our goal isn't just, listing facts. We want to dig deeper, pull out the really interesting nuggets about the Apache. Why did it become so significant? What makes it unique? How is it adapted? Think of it as getting the essential knowledge, the good stuff, without wading through like a huge technical manual.
Right. So where does this story kick off?
Well, the Apache story actually starts back in the early 1970s. The U.S. Army had this program, the Advanced Attack Helicopter Program, AAH. This was after the AH-56 Cheyenne got canceled. And the Army really needed a dedicated anti-armor attack helicopter they controlled themselves, something with more firepower, better performance, longer range than the AH-1 Cobra they had. And there was this historical factor, too, the Key West Agreement of 1948. It basically stopped the Army from owning fixed-wing combat aircraft, so a top-notch helicopter was crucial.
That's fascinating, isn't it? How that agreement really pushed them towards advanced helicopter tech. They couldn't get jets, so they doubled down on rotors.
Pretty much. So the AH program gets going, proposals come in, but it boils down to Bell versus Hughes Aircraft's Toolco Aircraft Division. Hughes designed the Model 77, which became the YAH-64A. It actually flew first, September 30th, 1975.
Just one day before Bell's YAH-63A.
Yeah, talk about neck and neck.
So tight. And then in 76, the Army picks a YAH-64A. What were the key reasons?
Well, a couple of things stood out. The Army liked the YAH-64A's four-blade main rotor. They thought it was more damage-tolerant, which is obviously important for a combat helicopter.
Makes sense.
And they also had some concerns, apparently, about the stability of the YAH-63's tricycle landing gear setup.
Okay, so damage tolerance and stable landings. Pretty fundamental stuff for an attack helicopter.
Absolutely. So Hughes wins, and the AH-64A moves into Phase 2. This meant building 3 pre-production models. And the original 2 flight prototypes and the ground test unit, they got upgraded to the same standard too. This was the period for really integrating and testing all the weapons and sensors. And a key piece of that puzzle, developed at the same time, was the Hellfire missile.
Ah, the Hellfire. Definitely synonymous with the Apache. What's the background there?
Well, development started back in '74. Its original name was a bit of a mouthful. Helicopter launched Fire and Forget missile.
Catchy.
Not really. Thankfully, they shortened it to Hellfire. The whole idea was to give helicopters a really potent anti-tank weapon. A game changer, really.
And it certainly proved to be. So the helicopter's moving through tests. When did it get the name Apache?
That was late 1981. The AH-64 officially became the Apache, following that Army tradition of using Native American tribe names.
Right.
Then, 1982, it's approved for full-scale production. The first one rolled off the line at Hughes's place in Mesa, Arizona in '83. Oh, and a bit of corporate shuffling. Hughes Helicopters gets bought by McDonnell Douglas in '84. Then McDonnell Douglas merges with Boeing in '97. That's how it ends up a Boeing product.
The usual aerospace consolidation dance. And the cost back then?
Around $7 million per aircraft in 1986 dollars, so not cheap.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
But even with all that development, the early days weren't completely smooth sailing, were they?
No, absolutely not. There was a DoD analysis in '85 that found some design issues, led to a list of like 101 action items.
Right.
A big one was the main rotor blades. These were 22-foot long, steel and composite things, supposed to be strong but light, but they weren't lasting anywhere near as long as specified.
How bad was it?
They needed replacing after only about 146 flight hours. The requirement was 1,500 hours.
Ouch.
Yeah. It took 6 design changes to finally get them up to 1,400 hours, and that wasn't until early 1991.
That really shows you, doesn't it? Getting from prototype to a reliable production aircraft, there are always hurdles. Iteration is key.
Totally. And the development didn't stop there. McDonnell Douglas looked at an AH-64B in the 80s, updated cockpit, new fire control system, stuff like that.
Did that go anywhere?
Nah, it got canceled. They decided to go for bigger changes later, but it shows they were constantly thinking ahead. Then, August 1990, the big one. The AH-64D Apache Longbow gets approved. First D model prototype flew in April 92.
The longbow, that was a huge leap, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What were the main upgrades?
Oh, massive. They did prototype testing, finished in 95, pitting 6 D models against a bunch of A models.
Yeah.
The results. The D model was 7 times more survivable and 4 times more lethal.
7 times. 4 times. That's
Yeah.
significant.
Hugely significant. That distinctive radar on top of the mast, the longbow fire control radar, that was the key. Full-scale production approved October 95. First one flew March 97.
Right, that mast-mounted radar allowed it to peek over terrain and spot targets without exposing the whole helicopter.
Yeah.
Big tactical advantage.
Precisely. And interestingly, production became quite global. Augusta Westland in the UK makes parts, both for export and for the British Army's version. And since 2004, Korea Aerospace Industries has been the sole maker of the fuselage. That actually caused a legal spat with the company that used to do it, Teledyne Ryan.
That kind of international collaboration is pretty standard now in big defense projects, isn't it? Spreads the work, brings in expertise.
It can, yeah. And speaking of latest versions, we have the AH-64E Guardian. It used to be called the AH-64D Block 3, but got renamed in 2012.
Okay, the Guardian. What's new there?
Significant upgrades, better digital connectivity, more powerful engines, and this is cool. The ability to control UAVs, drones.
Manned-unmanned teaming. That's a big trend.
Definitely. It also has full IFR capability instrument flight rules. Means it can fly safely in bad weather using just instruments. Plus, new composite rotor blades for better performance. They're still building these, 82 a year as of 2024. Demand is still strong.
That UAV control is huge. Basically gives the crew remote eyes, extends their reach and awareness without putting the Apache itself right in harm's way.
Exactly. Now let's talk about the design itself. That classic tandem cockpit, crew of 2, one behind the other, pilots in the back slightly raised, gunners in the front.
And both can fly and shoot, right?
Yep, fully cross-trained. 4-blade main rotor, 4-blade tail rotor, powered by 2 General Electric T700 turboshaft engines mounted high up. Oh, except the British ones use Rolls-Royce engines.
Right. And the newer D models got uprated GE engines, didn't they?
Yeah, pushing around 2,000 shaft horsepower, more grunt.
And that tandem seating is pretty standard for attack helicopters. Lets the pilot focus on flying, the gunner on finding and engaging targets. And those high exhausts help reduce the heat signature, right? Less attractive to heat-seeking missiles.
Exactly. Survivability is key. The crew compartment and rotor blades are designed to take hits from 23mm rounds. That's pretty serious anti-aircraft fire.
Wow.
The airframe has about 2,500 pounds of armor, self-sealing fuel tanks to stop fires if hit. There's even a transparent blast shield between the crew seats. The idea is if one side gets hit, the other person might survive.
Oh, the canopy itself isn't bulletproof, is it?
Correct. The canopy and windows aren't specifically rated against bullets, just the main structure and crew tub. Still, a lot of protection built in.
Absolutely vital for something flying low and slow near the front lines.
Right. For sure. Now, avionics and targeting, this is where the Apache really broke ground. The IHEAD-DS integrated helmet and display sighting system.
The helmet aiming system.
Yeah, pilot or gunner links the 30mm chain gun to their helmet. Look at something, the gun points there. Revolutionary at the time.
Huge advantage in reaction time.
Definitely. It can also be locked forward or aimed using the TADIS, the Target Acquisition and Designation System. That's the main sensor package. On newer Apaches, it's replaced by the Arrowhead system, MTADS, which is even better,
Okay.
and the longbow-equipped ones. That radar can track up to 256 targets simultaneously out to 50 kilometers.
That's incredible situational awareness,
Yes.
tracking that many potential threats in a complex environment.
Absolutely. And they're adding newer stuff, too, like the Ground Fire Acquisition System, GFAS, detects where ground fire is coming from, day or night, helps survivability against small arms.
Smart.
And with the pivot to the Pacific, they've been tweaking Apaches for maritime ops, too. Better radar for spotting small ships, software changes for engaging sea targets.
Shows its adaptability, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Moving from Cold War tank busting to potential maritime roles.
Indeed. Okay, armament. What makes it bite? It's got that 30mm M230E1 chain gun under the nose, carries 1,200 rounds.
Packs a punch.
And 4 hardpoints on the stub wings. Usually carries AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, the main tank killer, good out to about 6,500 meters, and Hydra 70 rockets, those unguided 70-millimeter rockets for area targets.
Right, the classic loadout. Hellfires for precision, rockets for saturation.
Exactly. There's even a Hellfire version, the AGM-114N, with a thermobaric warhead, good against troops in the open or in buildings.
Messy stuff.
Over the years, they've looked at other weapons too, air-to-air missiles like the Stinger. Some international users carry them more often than the US, perhaps because they don't always have guaranteed air superiority.
Makes sense.
You can also slap on external fuel tanks for more range. And like we said, the E model controls UAVs. There's even been work on directed energy weapons lasers, potentially for jamming comms or zapping small drones.
Lasers on an Apache. Wow. The future is now, sort of.
They're also testing newer missiles like Spike NLOS and Brimstone for longer-range shots, always upgrading the teeth.
Keeps it relevant against new threats, constant evolution.
Right. Now, let's get into its operational history. It's seen a lot of action. First U.S. Army unit stood up in '86. First combat, Panama 1989, Operation Just Cause.
How did it do?
Pretty well, apparently. Flew over 240 combat hours, mostly at night. Hit various targets. The overall commander made that famous quote about hitting a window with a Hellfire from 4 miles away at night.
Quite the endorsement for its precision and night capabilities, even back then.
Definitely. Then came Desert Storm 1991, big deployment. Almost half the U.S. Apache fleet went to Saudi Arabia.
What was their big role there?
Right at the start, first night, 8 AH-64As, guided by Special Ops Pave-Low helicopters, took out key Iraqi air defense radars, opened the door for the main air campaign.
The famous left hook against the radars. Crucial mission.
Very crucial. During the 100-hour ground war, 277 Apaches were involved, credited with destroying hundreds of Iraqi vehicles, loads of tanks. Big success story, mostly.
Mostly. What were the downsides?
Logistics. Keeping them flying at that high tempo was tough. Maintenance crews were stretched thin, getting spare parts was a challenge. The Army actually had to unofficially ground other Apaches worldwide just to keep the ones in the Gulf supplied.
So highly effective, but also very maintenance intensive, especially under intense combat conditions.
Exactly. Then the Balkans in the 90s, Bosnia, Kosovo. The deployment to Albania in '99 for potential Kosovo operations, Task Force Hawk, that highlighted some problems.
What kind of problems?
Issues with pilot training, especially on night vision goggles. Apparently few were fully qualified. Problems with night vision gear itself, fuel tank range, just general survivability concerns against Yugoslav air defenses.
So they didn't actually fly combat missions in Kosovo?
Nope. The air defenses were considered too risky, and frankly, the fixed-wing guys were doing the job. They actually lost 2 Apaches in training accidents during that deployment. Task Force Hawk became a bit of a symbol of the Army struggling to adapt.
It's like a tough learning experience. Need the right training and gear for the environment.
For sure. Moving into the 21st century, Afghanistan, Operation Enduring Freedom, starting 2001. The Apache was vital there, especially for close air support, like during Operation Anaconda.
Anaconda, yeah, that was a tough fight in the mountains.
Right. Interestingly, U.S. Apaches in Afghanistan and Iraq often flew without the longbow radar pod. Just wasn't a big armored threat, so they saved the weight and complexity.
Makes sense. Tailor the configuration to the mission. Were there issues?
Sadly, yes. There were some friendly fire incidents involving Apaches in both theaters, tragic realities of complex warfare.
And then, Iraq, 2003. Operation Iraqi Freedom. Big deployment again.
Yes, and a very sobering incident early on. March 24, 2003, a deep strike mission against an Iraqi Republican Guard unit near Karbala went wrong.
What happened?
31 out of 33 Apaches took heavy ground fire damage. 1 was shot down. It seems Iraqi tank crews expected them and set up a flak trap, just blasting away with everything they had at the low-flying helicopters.
Wow. So much for being invulnerable.
Exactly. The initial story was a farmer shot one down, but that was debunked. The crew survived the landing but were captured. It really showed that even with armor, concentrated ground fire was a serious threat. It changed how they used Apaches for deep strikes.
A hard lesson learned.
Yeah. Over the course of the Iraq War, several more were lost to enemy fire, including 1 confirmed hit by a shoulder-fired Strela missile and others in accidents. There was even that incident in 2007 where insurgents destroyed 4 Apaches on the ground with mortar fire, apparently aided by geotagged photos soldiers posted online.
Oh man, operational security in the digital age. That's rough.
Brutal lesson. But despite the losses, many damaged Apaches did make it back. By 2011, the fleet had flown over 3 million hours.
Incredible amount of flying time.
And the new AH-64E Guardian, First combat deployment was Afghanistan in 2014. Showed off its improvements, especially that UAV integration. Pilots controlling drones using their video feeds really changed how they operated. Faster, more fuel efficient too.
So the platform keeps evolving based on real-world experience.
Absolutely, and they've been active against ISIS too, in Operation Inherent Resolve in Iraq and Syria, still a key asset.
Clearly still in high demand for the U.S. military. What about other countries?
Lots of users. Israel got them early, AH-64As in 1990, then Ds later. They call them Piton and Seraph. Use them a lot in Lebanon and Gaza.
So that's controversially, right?
Yes, their use, especially in urban areas, has drawn criticism at times. They've even had some helicopter versus helicopter engagements, and they do their own upgrades too.
Okay. Who else?
The UK has its own version, the Augusta-Westland Apache AH-1, built under license, Rolls-Royce engines, folding blades for shipboard use. They're upgrading to the E model now, seen action in Afghanistan and Libya.
Folding blades smart for naval ops.
The Netherlands operates Ds, also upgrading to Es. They've deployed theirs quite widely: Djibouti, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, multinational ops.
Busy fleet.
Saudi Arabia and the UAE have large fleets, As and Ds. They've used them heavily in the Yemeni civil war.
Right. That conflict's seen a lot of Apache action.
Egypt operates As and Ds too, used in the Sinai Peninsula, again sometimes controversially.
Seems to be a recurring theme in some regions.
India is a newer operator. Air Force got E models starting in 2019. The Indian Army is getting them too, mainly for anti-tank role, though there have been some delays.
Another major military adopting the platform.
And the list goes on. Greece, Singapore, Kuwait, Indonesia, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea all operate various versions.
It really is a global platform.
And more are interested or buying. Australia, Poland, Morocco, Qatar. Iraq expressed interest once, but it didn't happen.
The demand clearly isn't slowing down.
Seems not. Now, variants. We've covered A, D, and E. There were those canceled B and C upgrades, and some wilder ideas, too.
Like what?
The Piasecki Speed Apache and Boeing Compound Apache tried adding pusher props or wings to go much faster. Experimental stuff.
Trying to push the helicopter speed limits.
Yeah, and they studied naval versions for the Marines and Navy, but they stuck with the AH-1 Cobra Viper family. Export versions often have specific tweaks for the customer, and block modifications just means adding upgrades in stages over time.
Standard practice for long-life military gear.
Right. So the U.S. Army is the biggest user by far, but its presence in so many other air forces really highlights its global importance.
Definitely. What are the basic specs again?
For the AD models, crew of 2, about 58 feet long, 48-foot rotor diameter, 2 GE T700 engines, speeds around 158 knots max, combat range maybe 260 nautical miles, carries that 30mm gun with 1,200 rounds, plus missiles and rockets on 4 hardpoints, and the DE can have the longbow radar.
A good summary. Speed, range, firepower. That's a core package.
And lastly, you can't ignore its media presence. It's shown up in tons of movies, TV shows, video games. It's just iconic looking.
True. That distinctive shape is instantly recognizable, definitely part of its cultural footprint.
So wrapping up our deep dive, from its Cold War origins, born from a specific Army need, the AH-64 Apache's story is one of really constant evolution. You've seen the learner, how it went from just an anti-armor platform to this sophisticated multi-role weapon system with advanced tech used all over the world. And the challenges it faced, design flaws, combat vulnerabilities, they directly shaped its upgrades. It learned and adapted.
And hopefully for you, the learner, this gives you a solid but manageable understanding of this major piece of military hardware. Insights into development, deployment realities, the push for innovation. We hope tracing the Apache's journey, those aha moments and adaptations, has provided some, satisfying knowledge without being too overwhelming.
Right. And one final thought to chew on. Considering the Apache's history and where military tech is going, especially with drones becoming more integrated, what's the future for attack helicopters?
Good question.
Will they keep evolving like the Apache, maybe getting even more linked with unmanned systems, adding things like lasers, or will completely new ways of delivering air power emerge that might, eventually make even advanced helicopters like the Apache look dated?
Yeah, will the manned attack helicopter itself eventually become obsolete or just change roles drastically?
Something to think about as you continue learning.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today you're joining us as we unpack the Mughal Empire, a truly significant early modern power in South Asia that flourished from 1526 all the way to 1857.
And it was vast. I mean, really vast. At its peak, maybe around 1700 under Aurangzeb, the empire stretched across just an incredible diversity of
Yeah,
lands.
paint us a picture. Where exactly?
We'll picture it from the Indus River Basin, parts of modern Afghanistan, way over east through Assam and Bangladesh, and then south across the Deccan Plateau. Just a huge mix of cultures, geographies, everything.
So our mission today basically is to give you a solid grasp of this empire without needing to read, tons of history books. We've pulled the key info from Wikipedia, aiming for a shortcut to being well-informed, maybe with a few surprises thrown in.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning. Who actually were the Mughals, and how did they manage to build this formidable and pretty long-lasting empire?
Right. The story really kicks off with Babur. He was a ruler from the region we now call Uzbekistan. And his family background was pretty impressive, descended from Timur on his father's side, and supposedly from Genghis Khan on his mother's.
Wow, quite the lineage.
Yeah. After some, let's say, setbacks in Central Asia, Babur looked towards India. He set himself up in Kabul first, then made his move south, crucially, through the Tiber Pass.
And that move south led to a really key moment, didn't it? The First Battle of Panipat in 1526.
Yeah.
That wasn't just like a minor skirmish.
Oh, not at all. Decisive. Babur's army, even though it was smaller than the army of Ibrahim Lodi, the Sultan of Delhi, had a massive advantage: firearms and cannons.
Ah, the gunpowder advantage.
Exactly. Their effective use basically just demolished Lodi's forces. It was a huge turning point, and the center of Mughal power then shifted to Agra.
So that first big win kind of opened the door, but they still faced quite a bit of opposition. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Just a year later, actually, near Agra, Babur had to face a big coalition of Rajput armies, led by Rana Sanga of Mewar. This was at the Battle of Kanwa.
And Babur won again.
He did. Again, it was partly his tactics, skillful use of traditional flanking moves, but combined, once more, with the devastating impact of gunpowder. It just proved decisive.
Sounds like Babur was a pretty sharp military leader, but the sources suggest his hold on India was still a bit, fragile initially. His reign wasn't super long, and his son, Humayun, ran into some serious trouble.
That's spot on. The early days under Babur were still quite precarious. And yeah, under his son Humayun, it really showed. He faced this major challenge from Sher Shah Suri, who actually managed to drive Humayun out, forced him into exile in Persia.
Exile in Persia, sounds like a major setback, but sometimes those kinds of disruptions, they can have unexpected results, right?
They really can. Humayun's time in Persia actually helped build diplomatic links between the Safavid and Mughal courts. And maybe unintentionally, this period of exile led to a big increase in Persian cultural influence within the Mughal Empire once Humayun got back.
Interesting. In what ways?
You see it in things like art, definitely language, even administrative practices. Persian elements just became really deeply embedded after that.
So Humayun did eventually manage to get back on his feet after this exile.
Yes, he did. In 1555, Humayun came back from Persia, successfully reestablished Mughal rule, at least in parts of India. But his second reign was tragically cut short. Just a year later, he died in an accident. Fell down some stairs, apparently.
Wow. A very brief restoration.
Yeah.
But this kind of sets the stage for what many see as the real high point of the Mughal Empire, doesn't it? The era of consolidation, expansion under his successors, starting with Akbar, going down to Aurangzeb.
Exactly. That period, roughly 1556 with Akbar's accession to 1707 when Aurangzeb died, that's generally seen as the zenith. You've got huge territorial expansion, innovative administration, and this incredible cultural flowering.
Let's dive into that peak then, starting with Akbar. He came to the throne quite young, didn't he?
Yeah, Akbar became emperor in 1556. He was only a teenager. Initially, the empire was run by a regent, Bahram Khan, who was crucial in really cementing Mughal power. But Akbar pretty quickly took charge himself, and through lots of military campaigns, he massively expanded the empire, eventually controlled almost the whole Indian subcontinent north of the Godavari River.
Right, and managing an empire that big, mostly through conquest, must have needed a pretty sophisticated way of running things. What kind of administrative changes did Akbar make?
Akbar was a really gifted administrator. His big idea was to build loyalty directly to him, not based on old tribal or family ties. So he created this new ruling elite. And he modernized the whole administration, made it more central, more efficient, plus trade with European companies picked up during his reign, which definitely helped create a strong, stable economy.
And Akbar is also really famous for his approach to religion, which seems quite well ahead of its time.
Absolutely. He really championed religious freedom, at least within his court. He even tried to sort of bridge the gaps between different communities in his very diverse empire by creating this new religious philosophy, Dini Ilahi.
What was that exactly?
Well, it drew on elements from various faiths, but the main point was emphasizing loyalty to the emperor himself. It helped foster this climate of internal stability that his son, Jahangir, then inherited.
Right, Jahangir. His original name was Salim. How did his time as emperor stack up against his father's?
Jahangir reigned from 1605 to 1627. He took a bit of a different tack. While Akbar focused on inclusivity, Jahangir put more effort into getting support from the Islamic religious establishment. He increased the number of Madadi Ma'ash grants. These were basically tax-free land grants for religious figures and institutions.
So a bit of a shift in focus there. And the sources also mention some conflicts during his reign related to religion.
Yes, unlike Akbar, Jahangir did have run-ins with non-Muslim religious leaders. A really significant one was the execution of the Sikh guru, Arjan. That event really marks the start of a long, often troubled history between the Mughals and the Sikh community. Jahangir was also, well, known to be pretty dependent on opium and kind of swayed by different court factions.
Okay, after Jahangir, we get Shah Jahan. His reign, 1628 to 1658, is almost synonymous with, like, opulence and amazing art.
Indeed, Shah Jahan's reign is definitely seen as the golden age of Mughal architecture. The court's splendor hit its absolute peak, and of course the Taj Mahal is the ultimate symbol of that era's artistic achievement.
The Taj Mahal, yeah, an incredible monument. But all that building, did it come at a cost?
It did. While the Taj and other amazing structures showed off the empire's wealth and artistry, the sheer expense of maintaining such a lavish court, plus all these huge construction projects, started to really strain the imperial treasury. Shah Jahan also kept pushing the empire's borders, especially down south into the Deccan region.
And then we get to a really critical and pretty dramatic point in Mughal history. The succession fight between Shah Jahan's sons.
Oh, yeah. Hugely pivotal and consequential. Shah Jahan's eldest, Dara Shikoh, he was known for being quite liberal, syncretistic in his views, a bit like his great-grandfather Akbar, actually. He was into blending Hindu and Muslim traditions, but his younger brother, Aurangzeb, had the backing of the more orthodox Islamic groups, and he challenged Dara's claim to the throne.
And it wasn't exactly a peaceful handover, was it?
Not even close. Aurangzeb defeated Dara Shikoh decisively in 1659 and then had him executed. Even after Shah Jahan got better from the illness that kind of sparked the whole thing, Aurangzeb kept his own father under house arrest until he died.
Wow. So Aurangzeb's reign, 1658 to 1707, marks a really significant shift in several ways then.
Absolutely. Under Aurangzeb, the Mughal Empire reached its largest ever size geographically, but his reign also saw this marked increase in the Islamicization of the state. He actively encouraged conversion to Islam, he brought back the jizya, that poll tax on non-Muslims, and he commissioned the Fatawa Alamgiri, which was this huge compilation of Islamic law.
Right. And there were other actions too.
Yes, he also ordered the execution of another Sikh guru, Teg Bahadur, which just further fueled the militarization of the Sikh community. From Aurangzeb's viewpoint, maybe these policies were meant to unify the empire under a clearer Islamic identity.
This whole shift in religious policy under Aurangzeb, it's something historians really debate and interpret differently, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. It's very contentious. Some historians argue his religious conservatism, his perceived intolerance, really weakened the empire's stability in the long run. Others point to evidence that he also patronized Hindu temples, maybe employed even more Hindus in his administration than previous emperors, and opposed certain kinds of bigotry. But regardless of those debates, it's clear that policies seen as repressive towards non-Muslims were put into place during his reign. There's no getting around that.
And these policies definitely had consequences, right, in terms of people resisting Mughal rule.
Yes, absolutely. A major rebellion broke out in the Deccan, led by the Marathas under Shivaji. That was partly a reaction to this changing religious and political atmosphere, and Aurangzeb's long, very expensive military campaigns in the Deccan. While they did lead to the annexation of Bijapur and Golconda, they also just drained the Mughal treasury. And they contributed to a decline in effective government and the economy in that whole region. It was just this protracted, ultimately destabilizing effort.
So from this peak under Aurangzeb, the empire starts its decline. But before we get into that, Let's maybe dig into how the Mughals actually ran this massive empire. What about their administration, their economy, their culture during this high point?
Yeah, understanding the administration is really key. The system, largely set up under Akbar, was highly centralized, bureaucratic. At the top, the emperor, then four main ministries: finance and revenue under the Diwan, who was often like the chief minister or wazir, military and intelligence under the Mir Bakshi, law and religious stuff under the Sadra Asudar, and the imperial household and public works under the Mir Saman.
Okay, that's the central setup. How did that work out in the provinces?
The empire was divided into provinces called subas. Each had a governor, the subadar. And interestingly, the central government structure was kind of mirrored in each suba, with its own Bakshi, Sadr, finance minister. But, and this is important, these provincial officials reported directly back to their central counterparts, not just the local governor.
Ah, so checks and balances, sort of.
Kind of, yeah. And subas were divided into sarkars, districts, then parganas, groups of villages. Each level had its officials, Muslim judges, local tax collectors down at the pargana level. But these divisions weren't totally rigid. They could be changed for better governance or tax collection. They kept detailed records for revenue assessment based on pretty basic land surveys, not like precise maps we'd think of today.
And where were the main power centers? The capitals?
The Mughals used several big imperial capitals over time: Agra, Delhi, Lahore, Fatehpur Sikri. The seat of power moved around quite a bit for political reasons, military strategy, ideology, even just the cost of setting up a new capital. Sometimes they even had two capitals at once. Kabul was also used as a summer capital for a long time.
And didn't the military camp itself function as a kind of capital?
Yes, exactly. Especially from Akbar onwards, the imperial military camp was like a mobile administrative center. Everything happened there. But after Aurangzeb, Delhi, specifically the walled city, Shah Jahanabad became the definite permanent capital.
Fascinating how those shifts reflect things. Okay, what about the law? How did justice work?
The legal system was complex. As an Islamic empire, it relied heavily on Islamic law, specifically the Sunni Hanafi school. So you had officials like the Qadi judge, mufti, legal advisor, mutasib, moral censor. But ruling a majority non-Muslim population plus Persian influences meant justice was also shaped by imperial rules, local customs, and just political practicalities.
So a mix of religious law and practical governance.
Pretty much. They used key Hanafi legal texts like Al-Hidayah and later the big one commissioned by Aurangzeb, the Fatwa al-Amgiri, but ultimately the emperor was the supreme legal authority.
So if someone had a legal problem, where did they go?
Several options. Locally, the Qadi was the main judge for disputes, crimes, inheritance, stuff like that. There was a hierarchy of Qadis. For bigger cases or appeals, you could go to the Jagirdar, a local landholder with admin duties, the Kotwal police chief, the Faujdar, district military officer, even the Subadar, provincial governor. They all had some judicial power.
And even the emperor sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes the emperor himself would hear cases. Jahangir famously had that chain of justice in Agra for direct appeals, and while it's less documented, local community tribunals probably handled smaller local disputes too. The Qadi's courts were generally open to everyone, Muslim or not.
Sounds like a layered system. Okay, let's switch to the economy. The Mughals were clearly very rich. What drove that wealth?
The economy was huge and prosperous, yeah. Contributed something like 25% of global manufacturing output up to 1750, some call it proto-industrialization. Their approach to trade was pretty laissez-faire, hands-off. They invested in infrastructure, built extensive roads maintained by a public works department, and crucially had a uniform currency: the silver rupee and the copper dam.
A standardized currency helps trade massively, I imagine.
Absolutely. That system was actually started by Sher Shah Suri, but maintained by the Mughals with high purity. The main source of wealth, though, was agricultural taxes. Formalized under Akbar, taxes were often well over half of what a peasant produced, and critically payable in silver coin.
Paid in silver, not in crops.
Mostly silver, yeah. Which basically forced peasants and artisans into the wider market economy. By around 1595, the state's annual revenue was estimated at a massive 99 million rupees. And interestingly, they mostly minted coins from imported silver and gold because their exports, textiles, spices were in such high demand internationally.
What about different sectors like agriculture versus manufacturing and labor?
In the late 16th century, agriculture was the biggest chunk of the economy, followed by services, the tertiary sector, then manufacturing, secondary. Manufacturing's share was actually higher than it would be later under British rule. Most people worked in agriculture in rural areas, but cities were vital economic hubs too.
And incomes, wages.
It's interesting, per capita income, measured in wheat, was relatively high compared to later British India. But wages for manual labor seem to have been pretty low. Slavery existed, but mainly for domestic service, not large-scale production. Agriculture itself became more productive under the Mughals, thanks to reforms started by Sher Shah and expanded by Akbar government-funded irrigation, the Zabit land revenue system.
What was the Zabit system?
It involved cash taxes, incentives for growing cash crops, detailed land surveys, cadastral surveys, and tax breaks for bringing new land under cultivation. They even adopted new crops like maize and tobacco and used advanced tech like seed drills, possibly earlier than in Europe, and geared sugar mills.
And outside of farming, they were a big industrial power too, you said.
Oh, absolutely. South Asia under the Mughals was producing goods highly sought after by Europeans. Like we said, about 25% of global industrial output up to 1750. Huge demand in Europe for mobile stuff, especially cotton textiles, but also spices, indigo, silks, saltpeter for gunpowder.
Textiles were the big one.
Definitely. Cotton textiles, piece goods, calicos, muslins were the largest manufacturing sector, drove a huge part of international trade, maybe 25% globally in the early 18th century. Bengal, especially Dhaka, was the absolute powerhouse for textile production. They benefited from the spinning wheel becoming common, better cotton gins too.
So Bengal was really key.
Hugely. From the late 1500s to the mid-1700s, the Bengal Suba was exceptionally wealthy, probably the richest province, vital for trade, both within India and overseas, rice, silks, cotton, opium. It even had a massive shipbuilding industry, possibly building more ships than the North American colonies at the time, and had advanced ship repair skills. Became pretty much independent under its own nawabs from 1717.
Wow, Bengal sounds crucial. What about the population overall? Growth? Cities.
The population grew significantly, faster than in pre-Mughal times, quite a big jump between 1500 and 1700. By Aurangzeb's time, there were hundreds of thousands of villages, and urbanization was relatively high for the era, maybe 15% in cities, though figures are debated. That's higher than contemporary Europe.
Which were the big cities?
Agra, Lahore, Dhaka, Delhi, these were huge. Populations from 250,000 up to maybe over 1 million. They were vital markets, centers for all sorts of jobs, though some were primarily military or political hubs.
This paints a picture of a really dynamic, large, diverse empire. And of course, the Mughal legacy is also massively cultural.
Oh, completely. Their cultural impact on South Asia is just immense. It's this fusion of Persian art and literature with local Indian traditions. You see it everywhere.
Like what specifically?
Well, the centralized administration itself, the blending of art styles, Mughlai cuisine, the clothes and jewelry, the Hindustani language evolving with Persian influence, those amazing Mughal gardens with Iranian-style waterworks, Turkish baths, Mughal architecture, obviously the Taj Mahal. Even things like Pelwani wrestling, maktab schools, Hindustani classical music developing, instruments like the sitar. It's a long list.
Yeah, quite a legacy. And the architecture is so distinctive.
It really is. It draws on Indo-Islamic styles, Iranian, Central Asian, Timurid styles, but incorporates Hindu elements too. You got those characteristic bulbous domes, pointed arches, polished surfaces, lots of red sandstone and white marble, even at ice houses. You find Mughal monuments all across India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan.
What about visual arts and literature?
The art, especially miniatures and luxury objects, was incredibly eclectic. Borrowed from Iranian styles, Indian, Chinese, even European Renaissance art. The emperors were huge patrons of Iranian artists and calligraphers. Initially, a lot of focus was on illustrating books, histories, court scenes. Later, you get these album pages, maraca, with individual portraits, amazing nature studies. Jahangir loved those, patronized artists like Ustad Mansour.
Any famous illustrated books?
Oh, yeah. The Raznama, that's Persian Mahabharata, the Baburnama, Akbar's Akbarnama, Jahangir's Tuski Jahangiri, lots of incredible manuscripts. Though Aurangzeb wasn't as into painting personally for religious reasons, the tradition was well established. And language-wise, Persian had this big comeback, became the official court language, creating this kind of shared Indo-Persian culture. And later, Hindustani developed in Delhi, became a literary language under Shah Jahan, and eventually the main language of Hindustan.
And they were a major military power, too, when the Gunpowder Empire. That's right.
Exactly. Alongside the Ottomans and Safavids. Babur's advantage with firearms and artillery, using Ottoman tactics at Konipat, was key to his initial success against forces that were bigger but lacked that tech. India later started making its own diverse firearms.
Did they use rockets or anything like that?
Yes. Akbar used metal cylinder rockets, called bands, apparently effective against war elephants. They used rockets and grenades in sieges, too. There are accounts of Indian war rockets being pretty formidable. They also used gunpowder mines in sieges.
And science. Did they
Yeah.
contribute much there?
They revised the curriculum in the madrasas, the schools, to put more emphasis on rational sciences, geometry, medicine, philosophy, math. This led to some notable scholars, engineers, architects. In astronomy, maybe not huge theoretical leaps, but lots of observational work. Humayun had a personal observatory. There was a blending of Islamic and Hindu astronomy. Even later, during the decline, figures like Jai Singh II built those amazing Yantra Mandir observatories using both Islamic instruments and Hindu math techniques.
Metallurgy, too.
Yeah, they had state workshops, karkhanas, making weapons, ammo, all sorts of stuff for the court. And a really remarkable invention from Kashmir was the seamless hollow celestial globe, made using the lost wax casting method, later made in Lahore, too.
So, an incredibly impressive empire in so many ways. But, as we mentioned, after Aurangzeb died in 1707, things started to unravel. What were the main reasons for that decline?
It was really a mix of things, internal and external. Right after Aurangzeb, you got a string of weak rulers, lots of infighting, violent succession struggles. Powerful nobles like the Sayyid brothers basically became kingmakers, running things behind the scenes.
So, internal weakness at the top.
Definitely. And during Muhammad Shah's reign, the empire really started to break apart. Huge chunks of territory fell to the Marathas. The governor of the Deccan, Nizam ul-Mulk, actually encouraged the Marathas to raid Mughal lands. Then Nader Shah's invasion and sack of Delhi was just devastating, crippled Mughal power, finances. That led lots of regional leaders to set up their own independent kingdoms, though the emperor kept some symbolic importance for a while.
And it just continued downhill from there.
Pretty much. More regional conflicts, more territory lost. Shah Alam II tried to reverse the decline but failed. Delhi got sacked again, this time by Afghans. The Marathas fought the Afghans at the Third Battle of Panipat. The emperor ended up basically a puppet, first under Maratha protection, then under the British East India Company.
And the British gradually took over.
Yeah, the company consolidated control, especially over Bengal, Bihar from 1793. Eventually, the Indian Rebellion of 1857 happened. The last emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, was exiled, and the British formally dissolved the empire in 1858.
So what were the key underlying causes of such a rapid fall?
A whole bunch of things, really. Incompetent rulers, civil wars, political instability. The empire was just too big to control, effectively imperial overstretch. Loss of money, the army's spirit declined after those long, futile wars against the Marathas, endless feuds among the nobles, and crucially, the rise of powerful regional successor states. It's worth noting, though, that the European trading companies weren't really a major factor in the initial decline.
A dramatic fall, yeah, from such heights. So, to kind of wrap up our deep dive, the Mughal Empire starts with Central Asian roots, builds dominance with military might, hits this incredible peak under emperors like Akbar through Aurangzeb, leaves this amazing legacy, administration, economy, culture, but then internal weaknesses, external pressures lead to decline and its eventual end.
Exactly. It was this huge, incredibly diverse empire that left such a lasting mark on South Asia, from its government structures, laws, economy, and of course the culture and architecture, the Taj Mahal, Hindustani language. The influence is just undeniable.
It definitely gives us a lot to think about. Maybe a final thought for our listeners. How do these dynamics that we've talked about, centralized power, cultural mixing, religious policies, economics, military tech in the Mughal Empire, compare with other empires in history? What can their rise and fall teach us about how states and societies are built, how they change?
That's a great question. It's such a rich history, lots more to explore. We definitely encourage you, the listener, to dig deeper into the Mughal Empire and its complex, enduring legacy.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until our next exploration.